What the heck? How did I get here again? Oh no. I think Mojang just released a snapshot. Bro, I literally just made a community poll over here for my next video, and you're all voting, and I guess Mojang's giving me free content, which I'm not complaining about. Very, very good free content. I love free content, but, well, I guess we're gonna make a video on... So yeah, this is what I've been up to with the Sculk sensors. As you can see, there's a lot of things to cover in this video. There's signal strength, there's the range, there's frequencies, there's all of this cool stuff. And at the end of the video, you can kind of see in the back already, I've also came up with some pretty neat applications for the Sculk sensor. So without any further ado, let's see what these things are all about. So first, let's go over the basics. This in front of me here is a Sculk sensor. As you can see, they added this really cool little wavy animated texture, and we have some things around it that make plenty of sound, but as you can see, it's not actually getting triggered because this thing goes off movement-based sounds. So this pig making all these noises, it doesn't actually trigger this thing over here. Neither does this note block, this bell, or if we just get a music disc in my hand, this jukebox will also not activate this Sculk sensor over here. So we have some things that do, like that disc coming out and dropping onto the jukebox, things like pressure plates over here, things like me walking, just doing this, things like me jumping and landing on the ground, flicking levers, opening doors, dispensers make sounds as well, also chests and buttons and lots of things, but we'll go over the specifics later. The Sculk sensor's range is 8 blocks away, so this is the entire range that I kind of plotted out with this ball thing over here. As you can see, this is the furthest it can detect any vibrations from, and yeah, the range is kind of huge. It's 8 blocks in every direction, and we get this giant sphere looking thing, and it's absolutely massive. The speed of the vibrations are 1 block every game tick, so here we have 2 Sculk sensors 8 blocks away, and here we have our lamps 4 blocks away, and as you can see we have 4 1-tick repeaters going into this lamp, but we still have double the distance on that lamp. But if we push the button, as you can see, both of these lamps will turn on at the exact same time. So this thing will travel 1 block every game tick, or 2 blocks every redstone tick, if you want to put it that way. So these things are faster than repeater chains, faster than observer chains, which is one thing that I did complain about in my Sculk rant. But now that they're faster, it's kind of a lot more worth it. It's really cool, honestly. Next up, we have some sneak canceling sounds, so things like walking, falling, and projectiles. So if I just kind of go here, and I start moving and walking, as you can see, the Sculk sensor gets activated. However, if I start crouching and then start walking, the Sculk sensor won't notice that I'm here. Second thing is falling, so if I just fall, as you can see, it will get detected, but if I fall and then crouch, as you can see, this thing won't be detected anymore. And lastly, we have projectiles, so if I just get myself a snowball, if I fire the snowball, as you can see, the sound of the snowball leaving my hand actually triggers the Sculk sensor, but if I just crouch and then throw the snowball, as you can see, this thing won't trigger anymore. The Sculk sensor gives out a 2-second or 40 game tick redstone pulse in all directions. So here we have a lamp thingy surrounding the whole thing, and as you can see, every single side of the Sculk sensor is activating the redstone lamps. This thing can also be water loggable. As you can see, we have some water and a Sculk sensor in the same block. The tool of choice to break the Sculk sensor is a hoe, so that's the thing that will break it the fastest. And lastly, it cannot be moved by pistons, so if I just go over here and try to move it, it can't be moved by pistons because it is in fact a tile entity. Now all of that stuff that you just heard, that's all baby stuff for little, tiny little, poopy little redstoner babies. Now we're going to talk about some really hard, advanced signal strength Sculk sensor stuff. So the first thing that it does is if you just normally connect redstone to the Sculk sensor, the signal strength will decrease the further the sound is. So this is a distance of 0, so right on top of the Sculk sensor we get a signal strength of 15. If we go 1 block away, then we get a signal strength of 14, and I guess I'm gonna better show this with a snowball. So the next one over is a signal strength of 12, and then a signal strength of 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1, the lamp at the very start turns on. So it's a very simple pattern, so when you're right on top of it, it gives the maximum amount of power, then it goes down by 1, and then it goes down by 2 each time you get further by a block, and then you know the weakest is 1. It can't just go from 2 to 0, otherwise the 8 block range would be a lie. So that is normal signal strength, but when you stick a comparator at the end of this thing, we get a whole different story. Here we have a very complicated layout of books and shulker boxes, and that's what we're going to get into right now. Now, fair warning, this part of the video is probably going to be the longest in the entire thing, but we'll be describing the feature they called frequencies, and as you can see, look at this long list, it's really overcomplicated, so we're going to try and simplify it the best we can in this explanation. So coming up at frequency number 1, we have the step sound effect, which is created whenever the player moves around the Sculk sensor. This includes walking, sprinting, climbing, and crawling. Mobs that also walk or sprint around the Sculk sensor can also give the frequency of 1. Next up, we have the flap sound effect, which gives off the frequency of 2. Now, in my testing, the only thing that was able to get the flap sound effect was the sound of parrots flying. I tried chickens, I tried bats, but parrots were the only ones that actually gave the frequency of 2. Now, the next frequency is the frequency of 3, which is the swim sound effect, which covers players, mobs, and armor stands moving through water. Items and minecarts through water, however, will not work, and boats moving through water actually count as a completely different sound effect, which we'll cover later. Next up at frequency number 4, we have the Elytra Freefall, or as I like to call it, the Elytra Whooshes. The effect is created when you actually fly past the Sculk sensor, not when you actually trigger the rocket. The rocket's actually another completely different sound effect, which again, we'll cover later. So this can only be activated by the Elytra whooshing sound, as you can see right here. At frequency 5, we have falling, so that includes players, mobs, armor stands, minecarts, items, scaffolding, falling blocks like anvils, pointed dripstone, concrete powder, sand, and gravel, and if you put a falling block in water, also counts. And lastly, there's this little bug where sometimes the player falling activates as a step rather than a player falling. At frequency 6, we actually have 2 sounds, so the first one is the splash sound effect, which counts as players, mobs, items, armor stands, minecarts, and boats hitting the water. Boats moving through land and water also count as a splash sound effect, and projectiles landing in water such as arrows, potions, tridents, and snowballs also count as a splash sound effect. And the second sound effect is the wolf shaking, so whenever a wolf comes out of water and does its little shaking animation, that will activate at a frequency of 6. At frequency number 7, we also have 2 sound effects, the first one being projectile shoot, which counts as any projectile leaving the player's hand, such as arrows, tridents, potions, and snowballs. And it also counts as any projectile leaving a mob's hand, such as skeletons, pillagers, snow golems, and witches. It also counts as any projectile leaving a dispenser, like arrows and potions, but fire charges do not actually trigger the Sculk sensor. Riptide tridents also don't work with the Sculk sensor for some reason, they just don't make any sound at all, and firework rockets actually count as a completely different sound, which again, we'll get onto later. The second sound effect is the start eating sound, which is the sound of the start of any eating animation, but this does not include honey bottles, potions, milk, or cake. And the sound can get transmitted before the player can even hear it. Frequency 8 is basically the exact same as frequency 7. It has 2 sound effects, the first one being projectile landing, which basically means all the projectiles that I just covered earlier from mobs, dispensers, and from the player when it hits a block. When it hits water, that actually counts as a splash sound effect, and when it hits a mob, that counts as a hit entity sound effect, which we'll get onto later, like I say a million times in this video. The second sound effect is the finish eating sound effect, which is the sound that plays at the end of the eating animation, and for some reason honey bottles produce the finish eating sound, but no other consumable liquids, so honey bottles cannot start eating, but you can finish eating. At frequency 9, we have 2 sounds again, with the first one being hit entity, which means hitting an entity with your fist or melee weapon, hitting it with a projectile, or breaking/killing an entity. Now, entities include mobs, minecarts, boats, and armor stands, and if you or a mob take fall damage, it also counts as a hit entity sound rather than a hitting the ground sound that we saw earlier at frequency 5. And the second sound effect is modifying an armor stand, so that counts as adding or removing armor, and if you add or remove armor yourself, it doesn't really count, which they kinda should also put in the same category in my opinion, but hey, I'm not Mojang. Now, frequency 10 and 11 are very similar, and they're also pretty confusing, so I'll try my best to go over both of them at the same time. So starting at frequency 10, we have the sound effect of using blocks. Now, what I mean by that is closing doors, trapdoors, gates, iron doors, and iron trapdoors, turning off levers, buttons, and pressure plates, and closing chests, barrels, and shulker boxes. And also in this category, we have breaking tripwires and also the deactivation of tripwires. Now, in the frequency of 11, it's the opposite. It is opening doors, trapdoors, gates, and all of that stuff, powering on levers, pressure plates, and buttons, opening chests, barrels, and shulker boxes, and connecting and activating tripwires. So I guess the best way to think about it is that the frequency of 11 will trigger when you do the first action of using a block, like opening it or flicking it on for the first time, and the frequency of 10 activates with the second use of the block, which is closing the doors, turning off the levers, and closing containers. And frequency 11 has one extra sound, which is the sound of an empty dispenser. Now, it's only dispenser, and for some reason dropper doesn't fall into the same category. So an empty dispenser basically means, well, exactly an empty dispenser. If it has a water bucket or a projectile, it will do those appropriate placing fluid or shooting projectile sounds. I still don't know why dropper doesn't make any sounds at all according to the Sculk sensor, but I guess that's just how it works. I'm not Mojang, but anyways, moving on. At frequency 12, we have the placing sound, which is placing any block, placing any fluid like water and lava, placing fire with a flint and steel. For some reason, fire charges don't work. I don't know. I'm not Mojang. Lighting a nether portal with a flint and steel. Again, fire charges don't work. Placing blocks, fluids, and fire with dispensers. Again, with a flint and steel. And placing armor stands. Minecarts and boats do not count as placing a block. At frequency 13, we have the breaking sound effect, which counts as breaking any block, collecting any fluid like water and lava. Extinguishing fire actually doesn't trigger the breaking block sound effect. Breaking nether portals, collecting fluids with dispensers, and breaking an armor stand still falls under hit entity, as well as breaking minecarts and boats. Frequency 14 is triggered when you cast the fishing rod near the Sculk sensor. If you cast it far away and you get like the little bobber landing near the Sculk sensor, that actually counts as a projectile landing sound. The second sound that triggers frequency 14 is a piston retracting. Now I'm telling you this now, the sound starts at the piston base and not the head. But for some reason, when you move blocks near the Sculk sensor from out of the range to into the range, it actually can't detect it, so that's something that I found kind of interesting. And finally, at frequency 15, it actually has several sounds that activates it, so let's try and do this really quickly. The first one is reeling in a fishing rod, which is pretty self-explanatory. The next one is the piston extending, which just like the piston retracting has the same rules. The sound starts at the base, and the Sculk cannot detect blocks being moved by the pistons, and 1 ticking or 0 ticking the piston will actually output a piston extending sound. The next one is an explosion. Explosions from TNT, TNT minecarts, creepers, charged creepers, and gas fireballs. And for some reason, fireworks also count as an explosion sound effect. I don't exactly know why. I mean, sure, I guess it kind of makes sense, but yeah, fireworks count as an explosion apparently. And the last one is a lightning strike. So lightning striking the ground within range, and this could probably be combined with the lightning rod to make some pretty cool redstone contraptions. And if it wasn't obvious already, the frequency directly correlates to the amount of signal strength that the comparator gives out. So if I do this, frequency of 6 gives out a signal strength of 6, frequency of 5 gives out a frequency of 5, frequency of 1 gives out a signal strength of 1. That is how the frequencies work. Now on to the last two things about the Sculk sensor. It has a 1 redstone tick cooldown delay or 2 game ticks, so if I just like activate it by, I don't know, placing something near it, as you can see when this piston retracts, it actually doesn't trigger this again because it has a cooldown. But if we put a repeater over here, then that means it's going to start doing an infinite redstone clock. So this is pretty useful if you have some tight timings and you don't want the Sculk sensor to just constantly activate over and over again. And finally, we have wool occlusion. So if you place or break wool around the Sculk sensor, it doesn't trigger it, and it actually blocks out sound. So because we have this set up here, this lever is going to activate this Sculk sensor, then it's going to travel to this one, and then to this third one and activate the lamp. So let's just see that happen now. So that's what it looks like, and then it just depowers. So you can use wool to direct the sounds in the direction you want. And then finally over here, we just have a square of Sculk sensors because, I don't know, it's probably gonna look cool if I throw a snowball at it. And wow, that looks so cool, doesn't it? So that's basically everything you need to know about the Sculk sensor, but how about we look at some applications that I have come up with. So here we have a bunch of redstone contraptions that I just very quickly came up with, but some of these concepts are pretty cool in my opinion. So this first one is a thing, so basically you can make any sound around the Sculk sensor, but it will not activate the lamp. The only sound that will activate the lamp is you opening a chest. So as you can see, the lamp has turned on. And the way we do this is actually very simple. Look at this. It's just a very simple circuit. Over here we have a lectern that is the signal strength of 1 less of that frequency of opening a chest. So the frequency of opening a chest is 11. So we set this 15-page lectern to page 10. And it's just subtracting from this comparator, and I've explained how the circuit works in my comparator circuit video, which, I don't know, a link in the description, I guess. Well, now I have to remember to do that. So, second thing over here is a door closer thing. I don't know, this thing's pretty useless, but I think it's cool. So as you can see, we walk around and nothing happens. This lamp indicates that it is active, so if we open the door, the signal will go down, and it will close the door, and as you can see, it triggers again because the sound of the door closing also triggers the Sculk sensor. So we can kind of do something like this. We walk through, and then the door will close behind us. Again, it's this exact same circuit, but it's just underground over here. So we have this signal strength decoder circuit, and also whenever the Sculk sensor is activated in general, it will power these two lamps with this torch over here. So this next thing I made is also very similar to these other two. If we just walk around this wall, you can hear that Sculk sensor, nothing is happening. But in this barrel, we have some steak, and if I just start eating the steak, then we should get some extra steak, because, you know, why not? So we can just start eating, and we'll start getting some steak, but any other sound will not actually trigger the dispenser. Again, same circuit, we have this signal strength decoder thing, but this time I just used a barrel instead of a lectern. I don't really know why. And we just have an observer that detects whenever this comparator turns on or off, so that's why we get 2 steak every time. And then over here we basically have 2 different kinds of combination locks. So this one is probably really cool. Now this one doesn't require any signal strength decoding. As you can see, you actually can't trigger these Sculk sensors at all unless you're like on the bottom. So the way this works is this is a block placing combination lock. So if I just kind of fly here so I don't trigger them as much, we can just start placing blocks on the areas, and as you can see, nothing will happen. But there is a certain combination that will turn on this lamp. So if we do this, then the lamp will turn on, and also if we break it in that order, then the lamp will also turn on. So if we just look at the redstone, as you can see, we just have 9 Sculk sensors, and they kind of have like this little tunnel pattern, just so when you place a block here, only one of the Sculk sensors will activate and not multiple. And then over here we just have a basic lever lock setup with torches and redstone dust, and this is a little overcomplicated because I just kind of rushed it. And then we have our output torch turning on this lamp. And finally, probably the most complicated contraption I was able to make with the Sculk sensors is this floor pattern detector thing. So basically you have to walk in this floor pattern to open that door, but for some reason walking is kind of too fast, so you have to kind of jump on every block. So I guess we're gonna start doing that. So we have to jump on every one of these blocks and the door will open. So yeah, this might take a while. So these are the last 2, so we'll just go here and the door should open and we can just walk through, and then it will all reset. So yeah, this thing only works in this pattern, so I can just start walking however I want all the way over here, and as you can see, the door is not opening. And if we go onto this row of blocks over here, then it actually resets the entire combination. So if we just take a look at the redstone, and I'm not in spectator mode, I'm very good at videoing, this is the combination lock. Now it's probably really overcomplicated, but I don't really care, I just kind of made it just to make it. So we have an 8-block gap between our blocks and the Sculk sensor. That way, when you step on one block, it will only activate one Sculk sensor and none of the other ones. And then we just have this line of redstone that will go on every single one. Now, the way this works is that because the sound is so far away, when we hit it, it will only activate one redstone dust at a signal strength of 1, so only one of these pistons will extend. So each Sculk sensor has its own piston, so when all of these pistons are extended, then this redstone line will turn off and these torches will turn on. So there's one that goes down here, and if we just follow this repeater trail, then it goes down here and all of these pistons activate, pushing all the blocks back up. And then also if we just follow the line here, we have this redstone line that will open, if we can get to it, it will open up the door over here. And lastly, we have a reset at the end, so whenever you hit this row of Sculk sensors, except this block, so yeah, this block doesn't have one, all of these Sculk sensors are also connected to the reset. So there's a repeater, we have some redstone dust, and they go all the way over to here and activate this 4-tick repeater line, and then all of the pistons reset. So the Sculk sensor right now, in my opinion, is pretty good because now there's a way to make each sound activate something different, but there are a few features that maybe I'd also like to see in the future. Maybe some extra sounds like the bell, the note block, and the jukebox could be added to the things that it can detect, because, I mean, look at the bell. It is a very movement-based sound, like the bell literally moves. And note blocks and jukeboxes, even though the note block and jukebox don't strictly move, those are probably the first two things that players are going to try and test out with the Sculk sensor. And also, this is like not really a feature that needs to be in, but it would be pretty cool. Maybe have wool just be soundproof, like in general overall, like it already is when you place and break it. But maybe if players walk on it, it also doesn't create sound for the Sculk sensor. So if I walk in it, it would do something like this, because you know it's wool, it's already soundproof, so that sort of makes sense, I guess. So yeah, other than that, the Sculk sensor right now is pretty good. Like I said, this is just a snapshot, so they're probably gonna change it, so this is not gonna stay forever. Who knows how outdated this video might be the next snapshot. But yeah, that is the Sculk sensor, and I guess I'm going to end the video when I land the ground, because I never know how to end videos. So goodbye.